The tape was real. Moscow knew. 443,000 Soviet conversations, recorded, processed, filed. Moscow approved every word they were allowed to hear. The kill chain. Today we enter Operation Gold, the tunnel that answered. Here at the kill chain we dissect intelligence decisions. The question is not whether it failed, but whether. George Blake sat in every planning meeting. He took That evening he met his handler on a London double-decker. He passed the CIA-MI6 meeting minutes, and a hand-drawn, Dulles had ordered as little as possible reduced to writing. Blake had already reduced everything to paper, and handed it. What strikes us most, every external security measure was already. The perimeter means nothing, the threat was already inside. To understand why Operation Gold was possible, we enter Berlin. Berlin was the intelligence capital. Every crossing was a data. Soviet HQ at Karlshorst ran 3 trunk cables southeast under. Lund had run Vienna's Operation Silver, he knew how. Jelin's BND supplied exact cable coordinates near the American sector. Harvey commanded CIA Berlin station. Former FBI paranoid. Precise, effective. Harvey ran the tightest compartmentalization of any Cold War operation. George Blake was born George Behar in Rotterdam, 1922. Dutch resistance, British naval intelligence. Then MI6, rising fast, 1950 Korean War. Blake was captured. 3 years in captivity. The sources disagree with the conversion ideological psychological pressure, or Vogel's 2019 book, drawing on newly available KGB archives, argues. Blake returned to MI6 in 1953, trusted, decorated, already transformed. When we first read the 1954 conference record, we verified. Blake attended the CIA-MI6 planning conference the same month. Everything Harvey built, compartmentalization, cover story, need to know, already. Moscow's question was not whether to act, but how. Moscow's choice was genuinely agonizing. We evaluate in retrospect. Option 1, expose the tunnel now, protect Soviet communications. Burn. Blake would betray 40 to 500 MI6 agents. Estimates vary. Option 2, let it run, sacrifice 2 years of Soviet. Moscow chose Blake. The operational cost was calculated to be. What would you have done? Blake is your most valuable. Let it run 11 months or burn Blake forever. Kondrashev, Blake's KGB handler, wrote later that Moscow never doubted. Kondrashev's post-Cold War memoir is self-serving by definition. Caution is. Construction began in the Altklinika district of the American sector. The cover, a fake radar station, workers were told nothing. The engineering challenge, 30 tons of soil removed without any rubber vibration damping throughout. Hand excavation only near the Soviet. Excavated soil mixed into concrete for the warehouse floor above. 3 parallel vulnerabilities existed. Anyone could destroy the operation. First, construction crews knew. Second, Galen had cable locations. Third, excavation completed February 28, 1955. Extraordinary by any standard of. May 1955, British technicians tapped 3 Soviet military trunk cables. 11 amplifiers, 50 recording heads, no detectable change in cable. Collection began. Karlshorst officers continued their conversations unaware, or subscribe pseudo Mr. Blake exposure analysis coming. Tapes arrived in London by diplomatic pouch 3 times weekly. 50 London translators worked in shifts. The backlog grew faster. June 1955 recordings might not be transcribed until October. Tactical. The counterintuitive finding, Moscow could not sanitize 443 conversations. Volume. Low-level chatter leaked through, supply complaints, equipment failures, personnel morale. CIA analysts built a genuine picture of Soviet logistics readiness. CIA post-mortem, no known attempts to feed disinformation. The intelligence. NSA assessed the collection far less positively. The two agencies. This is the deepest uncertainty in the operation. No declassified. November 1955, peak capacity. 50,000 tape reels accumulated in. 750 intelligence reports dispatched to CIA and NSA analysts in. Dulles celebrated the operation. He didn't know Blake had handed. In Moscow, Kondrashev coordinated Blake's operational protection with extraordinary patience. Blake was promoted. His Korean War experience was seen as. Harvey's paranoid security protocols were protecting Blake as much as. Early 1956. The operation had run 11 months. Moscow prepared. The discovery would serve three goals: propaganda value, intelligence protection. KGB Lieutenant Colonel Kotsuba received his briefing. Date April 21. His orders: proceed to Schoenfelder Chaussee. Act surprised, cameras would. April 21, 1956. East Berlin. Kotsuba knew about the tunnel. The East German crew had been briefed. They descended wearing. Western journalists were already on site. The Soviet press statement. The CIA tunnel discovery was the most carefully staged act. Soviet media ran immediate coverage. American espionage on socialist territory. East German youth toured the tunnel through the 1960s. Washington and London began the post-mortems. Howard the Soviets. Blake attended every post-mortem. He offered careful, measured analysis. His conclusion: the Soviets probably detected the operation through routine. Technically plausible, also precisely designed to protect himself. 5 years of analyzing the wrong question, the source of, not the engineering, not the intelligence volume, the 5 years. The real damage assessment proceeded invisibly. Blake continued working inside. Blake passed further material to Moscow. The tunnel was only. MI6 records and Blake's memoir contradict each other on. Blake's 1990 memoir claims purely voluntary conversion. Korean captivity open. Vogel's 2019 analysis, drawing on KGB archives, suggests psychological pressure. The truth we judge is probably both. Ideology and pressure. 1961 Polish officer Michael Goleniewski defected to the West. Goleniewski, was senior Polish counterintelligence. He had worked alongside. Goleniewski identified Blake as a Soviet penetration agent. The exposure. Blake's April 1961 arrest confirmed the worst assumption. Operation Gold. Tried on 5 counts of passing secrets to the USSR. Each 14-year segment corresponded to one of Blake's 3 categories. Now they understood. Every post-mortem after April 1956 was contaminated. 1750 Operation Gold reports now required re-evaluation against Blake's 5-year, which assessments informed real policy, which were based on authorized. No published assessment ever answered this definitively. The uncertainty is $6.7 million to build. Years of retroactive audit across CIA. October 22, 1966. Wormwood Scrubs. A rope ladder appeared over. Schulberg, an Irish petty criminal Blake befriended in. Anti-nuclear campaigners Randley and Pottle hid Blake in a camper. Kondrashev arranged the transfer. Blake reached Moscow to a hero's. Blake lived in Moscow until December 2020. He died at. The tunnel was never destroyed. Soviets sealed it. Equipment corroded. When the wall fell in 1989, the tunnel still existed. 2019, Vogel's Betrayal in Berlin. New CIA and KGB. Every thread converged. Engineering genius, intelligence paradox, stage theater. CIA and MI6 built security architecture to stop external penetration. The threat was already inside since January 1954. Resolution was: the Doctrine lesson Operation Gold forced into Western counterintelligence was: before 1961, external security prevents penetration. That standard was destroyed. Operation Gold, Cambridge 5 and Venona formed what counterintelligence had. Arnoldson drew the conclusion that defined and eventually paralyzed. Why study a betrayal for 5 years and never find? Because Blake's discipline was excellent. He betrayed only operations he did not flood the KGB. He was selective. But Blake had perfected the unremarkable career. 7 years invisible inside. He was right about one thing Moscow knew since January. At sentencing, 3012 operations compromised. 47 agents identifiable. What did US planners actually believe about Soviet readiness? Was Eisenhower's assessment of Soviet strength partly based on what? No published analysis answered this. The relevant documents remain classified. The Doctrine legacy. The 1962 CIA-CI staff reorganization triggered. Polygraph programs expanded. Personnel review cycles shortened from 10 years. External security can be perfect. It cannot detect conversion that. Blake converted in Korea 1952. Joined MI6 in 1953. Interrogation. The most significant systemic failure, not operational security but the Harvey received the Distinguished Intelligence Medal. His most trusted liaison. You are Harvey in 1953. Blake is recommended by MI6. Blake's credentials were impeccable. Korean War experience read as resilience. Every data point wrong. The only true signal was Lun, former Olympic skier, architect of Operation Silver, and his tunnel operated flawlessly for 11 months. The compromise was Gillen's BND emerged with reputation intact. His cable location. Cables exactly where Gillen said. Tap worked perfectly. The operation. Karlshorst, where Germany signed unconditional surrender in 1945. German military cables in 1945. Soviet military cables in 1955. Berlin was intelligence archaeology, layer on layer of compromise. By 1,400 hours, it was over. Cameras had their footage. Tape reels kept arriving in London for weeks after. 50 translators processed to publicly expose tunnels recordings. No one told. Institutional momentum. Operations developed their own inertia. Systems outlived their 1750 intelligence reports. Some informed real policy. We still don't. The most alarming legacy, not the intelligence failure. The greatest counterintelligence failure, not the agent who penetrates. Venona taught it. Cambridge 5 taught it. Operation Gold taught. The tunnel beneath Schönefelder Kalsee still exists in partial form. Full tactical breakdown in the description, including the damage. Next operation, another asset inside the room. Full breakdown pinned.